If you have ever watched your kid totally fall apart, melt down when they're trying to do something small but tricky, like zipping up their coat or getting Lego pieces to fit or even learning how to write, and thought, how does this kid unravel so fast? This video is for you. Hey, I'm Jon, and if you're new here, welcome. I focus on how to help kids actually learn in real life, drawing from years of work in child development and behavioral research and daily practice with my own parenting and my own kids. And today we are talking about how to help kids build a specific skill we call frustration tolerance. I care about this topic specifically. I do because I used to do this completely wrong. I had this perception that a meltdown meant that my kid didn't want to try, or maybe they didn't care enough, or they just needed to push through. But then I learned better, and by the end of this video, I hope that you will see frustration in a completely different way. And you'll have some concrete tools to help kids stay in it longer without power struggles or just pressuring them to just, try harder. First, I'll explain what's actually going on in your child's brain when they are melting down over a hard task. Then I'll give you 8 practical strategies that you can use in the moment, in the trenches, to help your kids stay engaged longer, plus one bonus idea that people tend to miss. So let's get into it. First and foremost, when you get to a task like zipping your coat is going to be the example that I'm going to use here, it's important to remember that what it looks like to you in your adult brain is probably different than how it's perceived by your child. For example, with a task like zipping your coat, that probably seems to you to be one action. But internally to your child, that's actually a pile of different demands. Holding all of those tasks in tension, knowing what order to do them, is what we call executive functioning, and specifically it draws on what we know to be working memory. Working memory, specifically for your child because they have an underdeveloped brain, is pretty limited. And what research has shown us is that when we hit the ceiling of our working memory, not just kids, but all of us, we drop off a cliff. It's not a steady decline of building frustration. It is like instant rage mode. And all too often we use phrases in those moments like, oh, you almost had it, or just keep trying, which makes it sound like the problem is actually with their effort. But the problem isn't with their effort. And when we continually add those encouragements, what we're actually doing is that just giving their brain more to process. Now they're having to think about our language. They're having to think about whether we're disappointed in them as they're struggling to do this. All of these social pressures and performance awareness builds upon that working memory, builds on that executive functioning lack, and it can just create a spiral out of control scenario where suddenly your toddler is melting down on the floor like an amoeba blob. And this is all because we are trying to be encouraging, but the way in which we're encouraging is actually increasing their mental load. And so just understand this. If you got to the limit of your working memory, if you got to the limit of your capacity on a task that was frustrating and new to you, and especially if you had an underdeveloped brain, you would go into rage mode too. It's not a character flaw. It's not a lack of trying. It is simply their brain coming up against their limits. So what can we do about this? Well, this is where we get into those practical tools that I mentioned at the beginning. The first of my practical tips is probably the simplest. It is just to share some of that load. If a task is new and challenging and requires a bunch of different steps all coming together in a really succinct way, like zipping a zipper, you can take some of those tasks on yourself while still allowing your child to complete the task in the end, thus giving them that rewarding sense of confidence so that they can build on that for future success. So instead of saying something like, oh, you almost had it, or keep trying, or ooh, just do this, or trying to explain it to them, just get the zipper started a little bit for them, which by the way is probably the trickiest part of that whole scenario for your kid anyway, and then let them finish it. And as you do that, you are not talking as much, which decreases the load. You're making it fewer steps, which decreases the load. And you're probably able to set a slower pace, which again, decreases the load. I can already hear many of you in the comments saying, but you're just doing it for them then. You're not actually teaching them how to do it. No, you're just teaching them one of the steps rather than all of the steps at once. We understand this conceptually when we teach kids anything, when they're learning how to read or when they're learning how to write or when they're learning basic math, we won't teach them all of the steps all at once. We teach them piece by piece. The problem is oftentimes we don't see how something like a frustrating task, zipping your zipper, etc., can be a bunch of individual steps that we're not even identifying. And that is why my second tip is actually to externalize the steps. This is not only helpful for your child, it's probably helpful for you because a lot of these actions that they're struggling with are things that you have kind of lumped together rather than actually breaking down into all of their component parts. The way to externalize the steps is to go piece by piece and say them out loud, or even create some sort of illustration or a drawing of each individual step in that complicated or even simple task that your child is doing. When your child is not trying to hold everything internally and remember all of the steps as well as actually act upon the steps, it makes it much easier. It gives their working memory more space to breathe and move. Practical tip number 3 is to pause at the first sign of overwhelm or overload. Oftentimes we feel like our kids go 0 to 60 in these moments because we miss the signs that they're building up to that frustration. But if you pay attention to them, you will see tension or breath holding or even just like frantic movement or increased silliness. All of these are signs, they're early warning signals to us that the overwhelm and the meltdown is coming. One of the best things that you can do is to pause before you hit that ceiling, because not only in the moment does it make it more achievable, but it also teaches your child that when they feel those things, it's best to pause rather than spiral out of control. In this way, this practical tip does not only help them with the frustration tolerance piece, it also just helps them with the general emotional regulation thing that they're trying to do and grow in, which I talk about a lot in my other videos. Practical tip number 4 is what I call chunking steps. And this is really kind of like externalizing steps, but being more specific with it. So in the case of having your child help them zip up their coat, you start with literally put your hand here, hold this. Now take your other hand, hold this piece. Put them together, right? You're chunking those steps together. You're walking them through literally the physical movements that they have to do rather than just telling them like, okay, start the zipper. That's a complicated idea for a kid. When you chunk those pieces, it'll make it a lot simpler for them and you'll watch them go through it more quickly. Let me pause here to say, I know how mind-numbing and overwhelming it will probably feel to help your child do these things. Building frustration tolerance is also an exercise in frustration tolerance for us, the adults. I promise you, it's one of the best skills that you can teach your child. And so I totally get the impulse, halfway through my 8 steps to just want to grab your kid's zipper and do it for them. But if you keep doing it for them, then they're never going to build that confidence that comes with learning those new skills. Which sort of brings me to number 5, which is just to lower the stakes. So often when our kids melt down over these seemingly innocuous tasks, when they hit that working memory ceiling and their frustration tolerance boils over and then they're just freaking out. What's really going on is that we, the entire time, are putting additional pressure on them. I get it. I have definitely been there. If I don't leave myself enough time to help my kid get out of the house, if I'm late for something, if I'm in a public setting when there's so many watching eyes and my kid is struggling to do this thing and I just want to get out of that situation, I will add stakes. Your kid does not learn well in a pressure cooker. Removing the stakes, just taking a deep breath yourself or turning away from the watching crowd and narrating calmly can do wonders. And forcing yourself to do this is also going to put you in the right headspace because so often vibes are caught, not taught. Your kid is probably melting down because it feels to them like you are about to melt down. Number 6 is to model mistakes without urgency. So this is again about lowering the temperature, but now we're specifically talking about mistakes and not rushing in to fix the problem whenever your kid makes a mistake. One of the cool things that I talk about all the time is how one of the top ways that kids learn is by observational learning, watching us, but 2, by mistakes and errors and then fixing those errors themselves. If you rush in and fix every single time your kid has a problem, they're not actually getting the opportunity to learn. Let me kind of like pull you over to me right now. Every single time your kid makes a mistake, it is an opportunity for them to learn. And every time that you fix that mistake for them, rather than letting them learn, you're putting your emotional convenience and your desire to fix over their ability to learn and gain confidence. So just don't be a fixer. Be the type of person who can be a little bit late and let your kid slowly work on that problem. Number 7, this is an empathy technique. It's just naming the experience. A lot of times it does help to put words to what they're experiencing, not to add to the burden of their working memory, but just to help them to kind of organize their thoughts. When things get overwhelming and heated, those thoughts can start spinning. This happens in adults. This is what we call anxiety or even panic attacks, when we have repetitive thoughts that just kind of bounce around in our brain and stop us from being able to do the tasks of daily life, or just kind of gets us stuck in a doomed spiral. You can come in with your child and name some of those feelings. Say things like, wow, probably feels like your brain's getting a little crowded right now. This is really frustrating. I can tell that this is hard for you. I can tell that you feel stressed about this. It's okay, we have plenty of time. Naming, rather than adding to the cognitive load, actually organizes and helps to reduce the confusion and add clarity. And that brings me to my last and final tip, number 8, which is, please, if you can in any possible way, try and end with success. Stop before total collapse if at all possible. Add scaffolding, help them by chunking, or do any of the other things, sharing the load. Do whatever you can so that in the end, your child feels like that process was rewarding, that it ended on a positive note. Because every single time your child goes through the neurological pattern of trying something new, being frustrated, not being able to get it, and then eventually with support or with, fortitude or persistence or frustration tolerance, actually being able to achieve the desired outcome in the end, you are building neural pathways for a lifetime of resilience. And here's the final tip that most people miss. Any amount of frustration that your child experiences that doesn't end in a total meltdown and complete overwhelm, which, by the way, it's still going to sometimes, but the better you can get at this, the less that will happen. Anytime they experience frustration and end with success, or just don't end in total, complete collapse and failure, they are building frustration tolerance. The next time they try and do that thing, or even something else, they will last a little bit longer. Maybe they could only last 5 seconds without getting totally frustrated this time. But tomorrow it might be 6, and then 7. And then someday it's going to be 60 minutes or even an hour and a half. And they are going to become a complete, amazing, brilliant learner who can tackle all of these tasks that nobody else has the frustration tolerance to tackle, and they're going to solve all of the world's problems because you were willing to hold a little bit more space and help them zip their coat instead of just fixing it for them. And just like any other skill that your child is going to learn, frustration tolerance is learned. It's a skill. This is not going to be automatic in your child. Some of it does happen just as they grow, but this is going to take reps. It's going to take day in and day out, not pressure, but support to actually learn this process and get through it. And as always, if you found any of this helpful for your parenting journey at all, please hit that like button below so that this video can reach the maximum number of parents who are looking to build frustration tolerance for their kids. And if you want a little bit more help parenting, consider subscribing. I put out videos like this all the time. I'm just starting this channel, and I really want the feedback of people subscribing and letting me know what they think about these videos so that I can know what to talk about next. Thank you so much. See you in the next one.